This weekend, the leaders of the travel and tourism industry are meeting in the Brazilian seaside resort of Florianoplolis. As you can see, the weather is absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately though, the same cannot be said for the global economic climate. The latest data from the World Tourism Organization puts visitor arrivals down by 8% for the first 2 months of this year. Inside the conference, the main items on the agenda include the global economic crisis, increasing pressure to manage one's business in a sustainable way, and the recent outbreak of swine flu. The potential impact of a pandemic is so significant that the opening session of the Global Summit has been dedicated specifically to the topic, and the World Travel and Tourism Council, the voice of big business, has commissioned a new economic model to assess the possible costs to the industry. With me is John Walker of Oxford Economics, the author of the model.
What the model shows is that if the current swine flu turns into a pandemic, perhaps over the next 6 months, then there'll be a real crisis for the world economy, and particularly for travel and tourism. And what we're predicting is that you could see a fall in travel and tourism GDP of the order of 25 to 30%.
Is it possible that there could be a scenario that's not as bad as that?
Oh, I certainly think so, and that would be our central view still. It's true that there's a fear at the moment, and it's clearly affecting people's travel, but the current numbers for infections and for deaths are turning out luckily to be on the low side, thank goodness, and there's a real hope that the current crisis will fade and that we'll be able to benefit from a recovery in the overall economy sometime over the next 6 to 9 months.
And what are the criteria we have to look out for that should give us cause for optimism?
Well, I think in the short term, I think things are looking quite good. The numbers of people catching swine flu has started to go down, and the spread of the disease has been somewhat less than we would have hoped. I think there's a real chance that over the coming few months, with the summers in the northern hemisphere, that you will see the disease start to die away, and confidence in travel and tourism and in the markets in general will return.
To date, fewer than 70 people have been killed by swine flu, whereas common or garden flu kills tens of thousands a year. That statistic has caused many at the summit to complain that the reaction has been wildly overblown, and they blame the media for trying to hype the story to sell newspapers. Is this true?
Well, the initial reports coming out of Mexico were actually quite alarming, and I think the media was going with what they had. But ultimately, I think that they stuck with that original tone of the stories when, in fact, they could have been putting into a context against other flus.
And should they have been more responsible about checking the numbers, do you think?
Well, I mean, they were also relying a lot on what governments were saying and what governments were doing, and frankly, the governments were doing a lot of stupid things. As an example, China was it had stopped all outbound traffic to the U.S. to, let's say, to Honolulu, because there were some flu deaths in Texas and New York.
That sounds mad. Have we seen more of that behavior?
Well, I mean, the Japanese were giving thermoscans of passengers coming off of airplanes, when in fact, if they were in the incubation period, they wouldn't have a fever at that point, but would be highly contagious. Also in Japan, companies were asking any employee who went out of town, or rather out of the country, to stay home and away from the office for 10 days after they return. That contributes to hysteria.
Whatever the severity of the disease and however it develops, what's clear is that news of it will cause the tourism industry to suffer. Let's hope the worst case scenario does not arrive, and the industry leaders will be free to focus their attentions not so much on contingency planning, but instead on encouraging tourists to visit beautiful beaches like this.